Hello. Welcome to A Room with a View. My name is Libby Flores, and I am the Director of Audience Engagement and Digital. Thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you can hear me. Maybe you guys can chat like a thumbs up, just making sure. And this is our second Room with a View. We've done one before, and we're really happy to do it on Crowdcast, where you can ask questions, and I'm going to point to that area down here. Excellent. And we already have 2 questions, and you can also upvote the questions that you most want to hear the answers to. And also, one other thing to note on Crowdcast, probably right underneath me is a bookshop button, and that bookshop button is going to take you to Bomb's Room with a View page, where you can purchase pre-order Drifts and purchase Amina's book as well. So that one's already out in the world. So here we go. Without further ado, we do have no readings tonight, so it's just jumping into conversation, and then we're going to get to your questions. So it's great that if you already have those written down. I don't know if you've ever been on Crowdcast. It's not like Zoom. You won't be brought onto the stage. So we'll just get to read your books, your questions via this wonderful little box. So again, welcome, and you also will hear from Bomb again because we will email you about our upcoming events. And thank you all for being here. So it is my good pleasure to introduce our authors tonight, and you can see they have lovely bios if you read our event info. But in lieu of reading bios, which puts a lot of people to sleep, I always say, I'm going to give you a little intro to both of their books. So we'll start with Indelicacy. Cain's small but mighty novel reads like a ghost story and packs the punch of a feminist classic, says the New York Times Book Review. The experience of reading Amina Cain's novel Indelicacy is kind of like that of meditating on a painting, says the LA Review of Books. And now I'm going to read just a few sentences just to give you a flavor of Indelicacy. It's not only that my husband believed women couldn't write, it's that he didn't believe I could. My coming up in the world was in marrying him and in my new clothes and jewelry. It's true, I did want everything he gave me, but I will die if I can't write, and then I will have wasted my life. And now Drifts. In Drifts, Kate Zambreno has taken nothing for granted. She has created a spirited, shape-shifting read that is in turn insightful, intimate, speculative, and mischievous. In her search to uncover the form's rich potential, Zambreno is unafraid to show us what she is made of, too. And that's from Claire Louise Bennett, the author of Pond. And here are a few lines from Drifts. The publishing people told me that I was writing a novel, but I was unsure. What I didn't tell them is what I longed to write was a small book of wonderings, animals, a paper-thin object, a ghost, filled with an incandescence towards the possibility of a book, as well as a paralysis. So, without further ado, you can hear both of these books are already in conversation together, and now we will invite Amina and Kate and give them a warm virtual welcome onto the stage.
Hi, Amina.
Hi, Kate. And
nice
hi, everyone out there that
hi,
we
everyone.
can't see, but we think you're there.
It's so nice that people from all over can attend this.
Right. Yeah. It's a rare thing.
So I thought we would maybe start talking about the title of the series, A Room with a View. So many of us are quite often stuck inside rooms right now, while we're also in these digital spaces showing everyone else's interiors, which I secretly love. But so you're in California right now, right? You're right outside of Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles, yeah.
In Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. I always think of you in like a tiny house in the desert.
I mean, we're in the very northeast corner of Los Angeles before it's not Los Angeles anymore, and we live on top of a hill that in an area that kind of turns into a canyon. So I sort of have, the place sort of has that feeling, but still technically the city.
You have that beautiful light. Is this the room that you write in usually?
I write in this room sometimes. I'm sitting at our dining table. Behind me is the living room, and behind that is our courtyard. And sometimes I write here, sometimes I write in the courtyard. Mostly I write in my study, which is very small. Only a desk can fit inside of it. And it's a converted laundry room, basically. It's that way, like on the other side of our kitchen. But we have a nice view. We are lucky in that since we're up on this hill, it's a small room, but there's a window that looks out onto other hills with houses and a door. I can go out to the deck. So it has a feeling of spaciousness, even if it's tiny.
I feel like I have such California envy with everything going on.
I know, that feels like such a brag. Like, we have a view here.
Porn. You're just
I know.
speaking porn.
But yeah, what about you? What room are you in right now? And
well, I'm in the living room. I'm on the couch. So like my office usually. This is the same space in Brooklyn in which I wrote Drifts, and then I've lived the entire time I've been in New York. Yeah, it's just a big, incredibly cluttered living room, and you can't see all of the toys everywhere on the floor, but I can see them. And my dog Janae is snoring next to me. We'll see how long.
I can see his ear, and I can see his ear and part of his snout, I think. Very
He's
sweet.
a little older since I wrote Drifts, so he's a little chiller and calmer.
Yeah, and he's kind of a central character in Drifts, which maybe we can get to in a little bit, but
maybe the main character.
Yeah, he might be the main character. But yeah, interiors, I think, are important to both of our books already. I mean, they're so important to this time we're in now, or they're such a part of the time we're in. But both of our books are very much take place inside and sometimes outside, and like the gaze goes outside. But you write so nicely in Drifts of the interior of the study, for example, and the Durr book that sits on the desk. I can't remember now if it's like the book is there for 2 years, but it's
there for the 2 years of the book's frame, but in reality it was there for about 8 years. It was there for a very long time. Yeah. So the book's frame, it was there. And I still technically have that desk, and it's Leo's, it's my daughter's room, so the crib is behind it. And technically when I am writing, I do sit at that desk, but most of the time I write like on the couch or in bed, to be honest. I'm kind of officeless. Mm-hmm. But forever I had this diptych open of Albrecht Dürer's two most famous engravings, Melancholia 1 and Saint Jerome in his study. And I think so much of like the tension of Drifts is the narrator desiring Saint Jerome in his study, like the sleeping animal, the sleeping lion, and the sleeping dog, and this ordered like studiali, but feeling more and more like the Melancholia with everything cluttered, on the porch, thinking, tortured, not getting work done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Drifts holds the feeling of both of those things, of that kind of the cluttered process of thinking, but also a sort of spaciousness that for me comes from the drifting quality of the book. I mean, at a certain point, you ask the question, can a drift be a form? And to me, the answer feels like yes, that there is sort of a new form created in that book, and that that drifting quality creates a kind of relaxed feeling or spaciousness. So I really feel both, the kind of the tortured, cluttered thinking maybe, and that, the sort of calm, spacious drifting.
Well, I think when I was working on Drifts for so long, we're now just like complimenting each other. But for so long, I was so interested in the sense of atmosphere in your stories. This is before I read the novel. The sense of atmosphere and the sense of space and the sense of moving through spaces. in your work. And I think that when I was writing Drifts, I really wanted to have like a trance-like feeling that I think of with your stories, the sense of driftingness and airiness. And when I think of your work, I mean, I think that Indelicacy is full of even more interiors than some of your other stories, because I think of so many of your characters as being outside in your stories, like biking or walking or somehow outside. But there's such a longing for rooms in Indelicacy to like finally have like the space to write, which also connects to like, this is called A Room with a View, but connects to Virginia Woolf's Room One's Own. Like, what is the space and the time needed to be a writer and an artist, which is so much of the tension of your book. But there's also this longing for exteriors in Indelicacy, and this longing towards the outside world and to landscapes. And when I was reading it, I thought of one of my favorite of your essays, Something Has Brought Me Here, where you're reflecting on Mary MacLane and other artists and writers. And you write that when you first start writing, it always begins with landscape. Is that the case with Indelicacy? Did it begin with landscape?
Indelicacy was a little bit different. It was still landscape, though. I normally sort of imagine myself into a place and a time that I want to be in that I can't be in. So maybe this period of time where I'm stuck in the house will be useful, because I'm going to be imagining myself out of it, I'm sure. But I was sort of missing Chicago. I mean, both you and I lived in Chicago for a little while. And so Indelicacy, its setting is sort of a combination of Chicago, missing Chicago, and imagine London, because I hadn't been to London yet when I started it, although I did go to London while I was working on it, and then just some other imagined place. And they all sort of get mishmashed together into something that's, you know, a place that's part real and part not. So it's not normal for me, but I was sort of, the landscape that I wanted then was this sort of city, you know, made up of these different places. But when I was in Chicago, I was always looking towards the desert, which I think is what, you know, brought me to LA. And right now I'm also now looking sort of, I keep looking out the window, like when I talk about landscape, but I'm looking towards wide open spaces again, I think, and maybe the Mediterranean, but that's probably just like a selfish, but yeah, but I normally, it begins, books and stories begin a lot for me with landscape.
Well, there's that movement towards the end where your character is thinking about the desert, thinking about the country. So there's still that sense of longing. Yeah.
And there's a movement towards it.
That reminds me of Rilke in Drift, like, because I write about Rilke so much in Drifts. And whenever he was in the city, he couldn't get work done. He had to go to the country. And whenever he was in the country, he had to go to the city. He was always, I mean, that's why he had writer's block for like a decade. He was always unhappy wherever he was.
Always towards the other. Yeah. And now we all have to resist that, you know, if we feel a kind of, we can't go to other places right now, you know, in the same way that we could before. But I love that it feels very meaningful now. You know, the beginning of Drifts opens with Rilke, with 3 branches of heather that are in a pencil box, like blue velvet lined pencil box. Clara, his wife, has sent him the heather, and he's not with her. He's thinking back to the year before, sort of regretfully, like, why didn't I walk in those fields of heather when I could? And it conjured for me that name, A Room with a View, you know, that the view is, that the heather is kind of standing in for that landscape, and that it's providing this view to this other time and place, you know, that he can't get back to.
And I think it's also, I mean, that passage about the heather is from his letters to Cézanne, which are these incredibly beautiful letters he wrote his wife, who's really his wife in an epistolary way. They weren't living together anymore, but he wrote Clara these letters. He felt he had to be in Paris. He was able to attend the exhibition, the salon exhibitions of Cézanne, who he had never heard before. You know, this was this undiscovered painter for him, this hermit painter whose ethos he admired so much, and he began to see Paris like a painter, he began to see color. And I think I think it's kind of a little bit BS on the part of Rilke, to be honest. Like, I think he's being poetic and saying, I wish I could have been at the country, but I think he's also kind of like fine-tuning his skills writing about objects. So he sees the heather as these like sculptural pieces, like he could sculpt them like Rodin, who he studied with, or he could paint them. And so it's like the way he describes color in that as well. So I see that Helena Fagerton is here, and she is my Swedish translator, and she read Drifts, and she had actually written an essay in Swedish, which is about the trend of heather in Scandinavian women writers. And another connection is that I last saw Helena. We finally met in person in New York right before all this began. She had a grant to go to Montana to translate Mary MacLane. And she needed to go. I thought this was so beautiful. I hope she writes about this. Hi, Helena. But she wanted to go to the landscape of Mary MacLane in order to translate her. And she asked someone from Montana, like, what should I do when I'm in Montana? And he said, look up. Like, look up at the sky. That's what you do when you're there.
Beautiful.
I think this longing for, like, I mean, in Drifts too, I mean, the character in Drifts is claustrophobic and agoraphobic. And I think the pregnancy in the second half makes her feel even more inside somehow. But there's like this longing for the desert and this longing for wide open spaces. But I do feel like Rilke, if I actually was in the wide open spaces, I'd want to leave immediately. There's more of this desire for like a landscape painting.
Yeah.
Like the openness of a painting.
Yeah, I've been craving them so much. I mean, I think for obvious reasons, but my friend and I, Alex Branch, she's a really amazing artist. She might be here too. I don't know if she's here. I don't know who's here. But we were supposed to go to the lightning field together in New Mexico, Walter de Maria's lightning field. And we can't now, of course. Luckily, our spots have been reserved for next year, for the same exact date. But I'm very much feeling the desire, and the longing to go to these open spaces. And now all of a sudden to go to, these beautiful land art pieces that I've like looked at pictures of in books for so long, but haven't really seen. And now I'm like regretting it. Like, when will I have my chance, to go to these places? And so I feel like they're some of the first places I want to go to when this is all over. But you also write about sketches of animals and landscapes by Durr, and the first part of your book is named after that engraving and or drawing, and I love it. Just this series of animals and landscapes that are in it, and
it's just really a notebook sketch.
Yeah. It's so nice though, and there for me as a reader of Drifts, there's definitely this feeling that the landscape you create in the book begins to not merge, but there's some blurring between that drawing and the way you write about your neighbor, about the neighborhood in the book and about all of the stray cats. There's a really lovely passage where you write, I began to see the house and the sidewalks as a dimensional space, like one of Durr's engravings, as if all these are the same striped cat drawn in different poses. Because the narrator, there's this little striped cat that she's kind of in love with and always looks for, with the raccoon tail. And for me, I felt like I was drifting out of both that drawing and this landscape, that you create in Drifts kind of seamlessly. And there, it going back to, the idea of Drifts as a form, that's one of the things I felt I was drifting between as a reader.
Yeah, I think that's so much of, I'm so glad we're talking about the Durr and Rilke, because I think a lot of like write-ups of the book haven't brought up those elements, which I've always been very curious about. But, John, my partner, is very seriously working on a book on Durr. So it's basically me also like,
Yeah.
It's basically me. I began to be obsessed with Dur, and I especially began to be obsessed with the animals in Dur because I began to be so obsessed with all the stray animals. And I think when you move to a city, and living in Brooklyn here, I didn't realize the heartbreak of so many stray animals and just the ways that I was internalizing with that or thinking through that. It's interesting too, now in this neighborhood, I'm in the same neighborhood. I don't apparently move. I stay in the same place. I don't travel, but it's obviously different. And the animals are out more now. The birds are out more now. But yeah, this was part of it, I think, is also the playfulness between the partner of the narrator and the narrator, where they begin to see Dur everywhere.
Mhm.
And a lot of their conversation begins to be about seeing Dur, and especially since Dur had a practice of putting his Offen Pinscher in all of his images.
Mhm.
So it began to be this sort of like game where I literally began to see like the bat and melancholia and the Halloween decorations in the neighborhood. But it was also that title, Sketches of Animals and Landscape. And I remember writing you actually a long time ago now about what I wanted out of Drifts, which
Mhm.
Drifts was a project I just bothered my friends about for a long time before I could actually write it. And I had these notes, and I remember like I knew I was supposed to write a novel, and I was like, I just want to write sketches
Yeah.
of landscapes. And there's that line from Wittgenstein I quote where, you know, he says, you know, well, it's what he says about philosophical investigations, that they're just really sketches of landscapes, I think is the
Mhm.
line.
Mhm.
And I remember you were like, oh, that should, I mean, just write that then, write these. It was this desire to write the sketch or the drawing or the notebook. And the
Yeah.
notebook
Yeah.
is such a desired space of longing for your character as well
Mhm.
in Delicacy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think going back to Janae, your dog is right
Asleep.
next to you. Yeah, who's asleep right next to you. He it feels, and not the entire book, but in moments it feels like a study of Janae, like the way that an artist might, study an animal to draw them. Like there is an artist gaze on Janae, like he's not just a central character, but there is this sort of, he reminded me of just like a little life drawing, like
Well,
model.
I think so much of Drifts is about my amateur relationship to photography. Like, I
Mhm.
think, although I do write about paintings and Dur, I think paintings are for Indelicacy what like photography is for Drifts in
I
some
agree.
way. And
Yeah.
it's a way for me to think through photographs. And I just began, and then I wasn't publicly posting the photographs. It was a very private practice, but I began to just obsessively photograph Janae. And it was before I discovered the work of Maura Davey, whose work I'm very inspired by, and who I have a photograph at the end of Drifts that's directly an homage to her. But like that she photographed her dog constantly, like just this like tradition of photographing animals as a form of love. And I think I was really interested in, Sontag in Aesthetics of Silence writes about the gaze of the animal
Mhm.
as like a gaze of silence, and Rilke does too in his um Dueno Elegy. What is Dueno Elegy? He writes out the gaze of the animal. And I think I was really like trying to be like an animal. There's this point where the narrator is pregnant and a male acquaintance writer is like, well, are you writing constantly? And she's like, no, I'm just sitting there like a dog or a cat and just looking, which
Yeah.
I think your work is so much about looking,
Mhm.
and the narrator being, like, to quote from your second story collection, being like a creature
Mhm.
who is looking and starting to train that gaze to begin to look and to write about art.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she's Victoria, the narrator of the book, is kind of looking everywhere, all around her. She's looking at art, but she's also looking at the objects in her room, or she's looking at other people, or it's all kind of one field for her. And she is so hungry for experience. Like there's the room of her own, but there's also like she marries this rich man, and that gives her the possibility to take ballet classes and to go to concerts and plays, things she'd never be able to afford to do. So it's, but for me, there's this like tension because the book to me feels so much about looking, and she's looking all around her, but there's also something about invisibility because she doesn't feel necessarily that people are looking back at her, you know, or that because maybe of her, you know, she grew up poor, like she's not expected to do certain things, like be interested in art or write about art, or, you know, so there's this kind of visibility and visibility thing happening.
Which you and I have talked about a
Yeah.
kind of, okay, now Janae might start going crazy at there's now the 7 o'clock clapping right now that's going on in Brooklyn, which is, and it's also very windy, so he's a little spooked. We'll keep talking through. Yeah, you and I have spoken. I mean, I think one of the first conversations we had as writers was considerations of class and like growing up like lower middle class or working class and contending with feelings of visibility and invisibility. And we've often spoken about that. Like, and I've wondered, like, do you think that's a reason why our characters are so passive in some way? We write, like, I think both of us write pretty passive characters who are kind of there and kind of invisible in various ways.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, like there's a lot I discover about myself and my writing through the writing I do, but there are other things that I haven't discovered yet. Like I don't know yet why I have written, you know, why I might write a more passive character.
Well, we've spoken about like visibility and invisibility, because certainly publishing is visibility. Like, so a desire for visibility, but I think so much of Drifts is also contending with this desire for invisibility, which is a definite longing within a tradition of writers. And the narrator brings up Balzer a lot for his like radical passivity. But yeah, I don't know why I'm so drawn to invisibility either, or even what that means, or what kind of privilege that is to be drawn to invisibility.
Yeah,
as well.
But definitely, like we've talked about, both sort of feeling invisible as children, you know, and wondering if that's part of what made us want to be writers. I think that's something that Drifts gets to a little bit too, or just this desire, not just to be visible, but to counter the public self is something you talk about in Drifts that I relate to a lot, you know, like to counter the public self that can't say and do certain things because they don't want to get fired from their jobs, for instance, or
having to be like so polite or subservient. And then I think your writing voice, like one of my favorite parts of your book are like the insults the narrator thinks through, like when she goes to the reading. And so I do think like that interior voice can be that space of reacting or talking back when you're supposed to usually be this like happiness or politeness or passivity.
Yeah, or a certain composed, cheerful self. I mean, for me, writing feels like such a relief because of that.
It often is when I feel most ghostly, like with capitalism or within the family, that I feel most like a writer or most like I need to write. Like this other space.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot.
Should we open it up for questions right now?
Sure.
Yeah, let's look at the questions. Okay, I should probably be reading these out loud to make this more dynamic.
Yeah.
This is a question. So this is from Morgan. Hi, Morgan. This is a question for both Amina and Kate. Do you find this longing for landscape working to shape the landscape or space of the text, or even the prose line that you are working on at a particular time?
Can you repeat that? Sorry to have to make you repeat it.
Do you find this longing for landscape working to shape the landscape or space of the text, or even the prose line that you're working on at a particular time? We've spoken about like the space of the text and how we think about like, and you were saying something very interesting about like your sentences, like as we were communicating over email. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, and this would be, I guess, more in terms of interiors, but I had a conversation with the writer, Karen Balin, and I was telling her, for some reason, I can't remember why now, but of my love of shaker rooms. And so she asked the question, is Indelicacy a shaker room? and I don't know if it is, but I started thinking that my sentences probably are, or at least I want them to be, in their plainness.
The sentences are rooms, or the sentences are the objects in a room?
Just that the sentences themselves might have sort of the feeling of a shaker room. That things, that there might still be mystery in them, but that the mystery happens kind of plainly. And so I think that's a case where that interior landscape, if you want to call it that, does shape what I end up writing. But often, I mean, I'm so overcome by landscapes out there, like the desert, or if I think about like the Mediterranean right now, like they're so strong for me that it's me just sort of like constantly going towards them in my writing. I don't know if they shape the narrative or anything like that, but it's just this like movement towards them, I guess, that's very strong, and that makes me sort of return to them again and again in a narrative. But I don't know.
There's this reminds me of this beautiful line in Indelicacy, which is after a reading of the Dutch genre painting Interior by Wilhelm Hammershoy. I'm always fooled by these suggestions of other rooms we might go into, but never can, never will. Another space, but it is closed to us, even if it feels open. Thought of in a different way, if it is all suggestion, what is in the room is ours. And you're contemplating a painting of a woman whose back is, we only see her back. But the room is very sparse in a way, but it's really about like what's beyond the door.
Right.
And I think drifts and recent work like Book of Mutter, I'm very interested in like doors and rooms and like how the space of a text can be like a room. But that is really an interest in like interior landscapes, I think, more than exterior landscapes.
Yeah.
The objects in a room.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking about how so often in Indelicacy, Victoria, the narrator, is always kind of wanting to leave the room, not leave the room, but see what's just beyond it, where I love how much there's this attempt, to stay in the room in drifts, to go further and further into the room.
And the room is also that like mental space, the idea of like to have space, the desire for spaciousness. So this is from Sam. This question is for both Kate and Amina. Art plays such an important part in your work, as your characters and thoughts stem from your and your characters' experience with art. I was wondering if you'd be willing to each mention one artist who inspires you and why they do.
Do you want me to go first, or do you want to? Okay. It's such a hard question, because I love so many artists. I mean, on one hand, I want to say like someone like Kara Walker, whose work I love. My work is not like Kara Walker's, but there's this way in which it feels, it's obviously going deeply into the past, but feels contemporary. And that's something that I'm interested in Indelicacy. But, on the other hand, I'm thinking so much of, like I said, of these earthworks right now too, and that's maybe for a future project. I don't know, maybe my next novel. I don't know.
I love that idea.
But yeah, just this, now that I can't go to the lightning field this year, that it's occupying something in me, so I don't know if I'm completely answering the question. I've gone beyond it by answering with two artists, two works.
I'm thinking a lot about photography still. Like I think like the past like 4 books I've written have been obsessed with photography. I'm supposed to be writing a book on Hervé Guibert, so I've been thinking a lot about his photographs, and I'm thinking a lot about also Maura Davies' photographs, as they are super inspired by Hervé Guibert. And I love with Maura Davies and Hervé Guibert's work how their photographs often gesture to the act of reading, to like some of my favorite of Guibert's photographs aren't his self-portraits or his portraits of friends, although I love those too, but his photographs of himself at his desk, or just his desk as a sort of mise-en-scène, or his bookshelf and the sort of Renaissance postcards he has on his bookshelf. So I'm really thinking about photography that's very like sly and referential, and is about reading. and even gesturing to like Renaissance painting, etc. That has that sort of system within it that's quite playful. So I think that's what I'm thinking about now. Okay, so we more questions. Oh, yeah, so this is from Nels. What museum, gallery, or performance space do you most want to visit after they open again? You went to museums to work on Indelicacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to the National Gallery in London and spent a couple of, I almost said years there, a couple of days there. I went to the Met in New York. I went to the Frick Museum. I went to museums around here like the Getty and LACMA. Yeah, so I went to lots of museums. I mean, I honestly just want to, you know, when I was in New York in February, I went to see Walter de Maria's Earth Room. Have you been there, Kate?
No. I knew you were gonna. I was like, is she gonna ask me if I've been there? No, I haven't been there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Go.
I had never been there, you know, in the different times I've been to New York, but you know, you're just there in front of all this dirt that's been there since 1977, and it felt so. I felt such a sense of peace being there, and relaxation and relief. And so, you know, as I said earlier, I do want to go to museums and galleries when I can go again, but I want to visit these earthworks that, you know, now I'm like 48 and I haven't, like, I've not seen them, you know, so I want to go to the Lightning Field when I can, and I want to go to the Spiral Jetty, and you know, Robert Smithson in Utah, and, you know, I'm kicking myself now for being like a couple of hours away from it and not driving to it, you know, because it was like, oh, it'll add like 4 hours of driving time to our trip, you know, and not doing it. But I want to see James Turrell's Rodin Crater when I can. So that's very much where I'm at now. You know, more than galleries and museums, I want to go to those places.
I'm just realizing, I think because of all this, I've realized that living in New York, I mean, my favorite part of living in New York are the museums and galleries, and also the sense of like discovery with the museums and galleries. And I think a lot of drifts is walking around discovering art, like discovering Sarah Charlesworth's still series, or you know, sitting in the Ankara room at Dia Beacon. And I really miss that. And it feels like I mean, it's a contextual loss, but it definitely feels like a loss. And that was something, even with a small child, that I could do, that I would still quite regularly. And so it's about like just this discovery of artists I didn't know before, but also like, you know, when I was working on drifts or the material for drifts, like going and checking out all the Vermeers that are at the Frick or at the Met, and being able to actually be in front of a Vermeer. Or one of my favorite things about the Met is all the Manets they have at the Met, like the Manet that's unfinished, that's about Baudelaire's funeral, which is a painting that I keep on thinking I'm going to write about, and I keep on not writing about the funeral, the fact that it's unfinished. And I love Manet. I love his weird use of black and how he's such a copyist and copycat. But just like being there, even for like a half hour, and then returning back to the city was always, it's just like one of the things I've always have done. So I look forward to doing a lot of seeing art, hopefully soon. It's sad. So Clancy had a question. Hi, Clancy. You work at Seminary Co-op in Chicago, which is an amazing bookstore. What are we reading and working on now? That was Clancy's question.
Okay. I just finished reading The Door by Magda Sabo. Have you? I don't know if you've read that novel, Kate, but I found it amazing. I am now reading a novel, My Heart Hemmed In, by, I'm going to mispronounce her name, Marie Nadai. I think that's how you, I don't know if that's how you
Okay, you and I talked about this before. I'm the worst person to ask about pronunciation.
I know. Yeah, my first book by her. I'm really enjoying it. It's dark, but in terms of writing, I have been working on a book of essays about this about the space of reading and writing fiction, but it also goes into art and film and other forms too. And I'm just about finished with it.
Oh, really?
I can't quite.
What are you calling it?
I'm calling it. So this is the first time I'm really saying this publicly, but and maybe everyone, because I have a lot of trouble with titles, so maybe everyone can vote like this is a bad title.
Vote up the title.
A good title.
Well, I was part of the committee of renaming your book.
Yeah.
I did not choose the name, so I don't know how much of a help that is.
But so its name is Friends, Frens, which is like an Old English word that means both stranger and friend.
You sure it's not after the TV show?
Is there a TV show called Friends?
Friends. I thought you said Friends.
Oh, like no. Like, no, Friends, like Frens. That I stumbled upon that word in a Susan Howe book. Now I can't even remember which Susan Howe it was. So I have it written down somewhere, obviously.
Friends.
But I like the idea. It's Friends, like Frens. So it's like this strange word that maybe people don't. Maybe I don't know. Other people may know what it means. I might not have known what it meant if I didn't stumble upon it and I didn't look it up. But I like that it can mean both stranger and friends, both at the same time. Or stranger,
kind of like creature.
Yeah, although I keep having these one word titles.
So I Go to Some Hollow is a long title.
Yeah, that's like my only long title. But I don't know. What about you, Kate? What are you reading? And
I'm reading nothing.
Yeah.
That's such an unfashionable thing to say. I mean, I'm reading a lot of really good graduate work, but I go through real periods of reading allergy where I just can't read anything. And I think, everything that's going on, and also Driss is about this. When I'm pregnant, I don't tend to read except like crap. So I'm not reading anything. The answer is I'm reading for my Gebert book. So I'm reading To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life. I've read it like 50 times in the past. I just keep on reading it over and over again. But I'm teaching hopefully a class on environmental writing for all next year, and so I have like a list of books to read for it. But yeah, I'm not reading much. It's terrible. I'm supposed to be working on the Gebert book, and then I'm working on a collection of essays that I think of as like speculative essays that I've been working on for a while, called The Missing Person, which is so that will deal with animals too.
That's a nice title.
Missing Person. Yeah, it's the name of the Kafka piece that was originally in Driss. The whole Kafka story was originally in Driss.
Yeah.
I remember you had as the epigraph to the book that is now Indelicacy, that line from Rilke, which is after the Heather, one lives so badly and one comes into the present unfinished, unable, distracted. And I asked you to take it out.
No, but I was
why did I do that?
I was sort of horrified to know, that you were also like, it's such a good passage though. And I feel it really speaks to definitely like both of our books, but it's
what's wrong with me?
Yeah, no, nothing. No, we have some interesting
I know confluences.
But
that quote, one lives so badly and one comes into the present unfinished, unable, distracted. Like for a while, that's all Driss was that quote. And can I write through that concept of not wanting to be in the present, but wanting to write the present somehow. Okay, there's more questions. Do we have, are we going over? Are we doing okay with time?
It's about, it's 4:19 in LA. I guess that means it's 7:19 in New York.
Lauren from Book Court. Hi, Lauren. We both know Lauren.
Lauren, yes.
Thinking of your characters' subjects, how they're passive or outsiders from conventional privileged society. Does this new isolation we're experiencing change the way you perceive being an outsider or what it means to be passive? Or has it remained the same? I live in New York, and teach at pretty prestigious schools, even though I'm an adjunct. I don't think I've been an outsider for some time, even if I mourn that. I don't think I have been. I think that Heroines was really written from the point of view of someone who felt to be an outsider outside of literature and publishing hierarchies. But I think I more cultivate the sort of sense of apartness or alienation of certain writers than actually. I think I'm more like someone who is probably, unfortunately, an insider who thinks that they're an outsider. What about you, Amina?
It's hard to say, I think I often have felt I think I've often felt like an outsider and often still do. But I don't think that's entirely true. It's one of those things. It's not an absolute. I think
it's a feeling. There's a sense of feeling to it, I think. And I think for me, like, there's a sense of like the systems of pedigree, or even within New York, like coming to New York and, realizing people like went through these different systems, and schools, and had families who were like artists or successful or proud of them. That felt very alarming to me.
Yeah.
It felt very strange. Like, all these people's parents are supportive of them. Like, that seems that's so interesting to me. So maybe that is a sense of feeling outside.
Yeah, I've always felt supported by my parents in my writing, but yeah, I think there are just certain worlds and dimensions that are hard for me to enter. That just still feel foreign to me. It might sound crazy, but I think there was a long time. I don't know if I would still feel this way when I felt like I couldn't even walk onto the campus of an Ivy League school. Like,
well, I didn't know the name of a lot of schools until I moved to New York. I was like, what's a Wesleyan? I didn't know what a Wesleyan was. Like, there was this whole like East Coast system of like prestige and privilege. I didn't understand at all.
Yeah.
Well, only being from the Midwest, I think, probably.
Yeah. Luckily, I have, well, not luckily, but I have some friends who've gone to Ivy League schools and they've been very sweet. So, it's not like
when I teach an Ivy League school, they're like, it's completely, but I think it's more like, there is a moment in Drifts where the narrator is thinking like, who has confidence and who doesn't have confidence. And this is something Banu Capio, who we both love quite a lot as a person and as a writer, that she's spoken to me quite a lot about, and I think formed some of the inspiration behind Drifts and the Gibber book, is like the writers who write with confidence that what they read should be read and that they belong in this like vast canon. And I think there are the writers who write with more doubt and insecurity, and maybe passivity. I mean, you have in the Banu Capio, Bon and Banlieue, that movement of like laying down, right?
Yeah.
Which is like also this movement of revolt and resistance. But I think with both of us, perhaps the community we've cultivated, there is more of that spirit of doubt than confidence, which can come with background and upbringing.
Yeah. But I was going to say, with all the people I've been blessed to be friends with and be in community with, I feel like nothing but an insider.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so it becomes I think saying too much that one's an outsider can become, but I do think this idea of feeling more in love with writers who might be more on the margins is kind of a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we should probably take maybe one more and then we should wrap it up.
Okay.
If there's,
So, this is Emma. I love the lines in Indelicacy that talk about the struggle of writing. I feel so comforted having heard you talk about your experience writing so slowly, Amina. I'm curious to hear you talk about process, working through material you didn't like. I know you've talked specifically about getting rid of preciousness, but I'm curious to hear more about the distinction that you draw between the processes of pre-writing and then writing.
Well, it's pretty easy for me to draw a distinction between them because pre-writing feels so torturous. for me at least. I mean, I hear people say, writers say a lot that they like the beginning of a project because of its openness, you know, like so much is possible. But I just always find it torturous, you know, and so like with Indelicacy, all the writing I did in the first year that barely even made it into the book, I feel like I'm wasting time in those moments, and yet I know it's necessary. I have to do it. I have to go through the pre-writing phase. And right now I'm trying to write just a very short essay that I have a deadline for. And I think I've just broken past the pre-writing phase into a phase that feels like now I'm writing. And so I'm relieved about that.
Is the space of an essay versus the space of a story versus the space of the novel different for you?
Well, you know, I feel like with the short stories and the novel, they're sort of parallel in that if I write a short story, I have to do a month of pre-writing before I can get into the like 2 months of writing. And then, you know, with Indelicacy, I had to do a year of pre-writing before I got into the like, you know, 2 or 3 years of writing.
Did you outline it at all or know where it was going to go, or did the characters just kind of emerge?
Yeah, things emerge. I didn't outline it. I mean, at a certain point, I kind of mapped out what I had done, you know, just to sort of get a better sense of it. But you know, with essays, I can write essays a bit more quickly than I can write fiction, and so that pre-writing phase isn't as torturous, and it doesn't take as long. You know, it might take like a few days as opposed to a month. Luckily,
because you know more what will be the objects in your essay.
Yeah, I'm usually starting out, you know, with an idea of what I'm going to be writing about. And
so what did Indelicacy begin with? Like, what was the thing that made you start writing it?
It began with a sort of, I think, the setting, you know, like I said, which like I was sort of moving towards this imagined London and this nostalgic Chicago at the same time. It began with a couple of images, like a candlestick. I couldn't really get going until I found the narrative voice that felt right for it. And so that's kind of what was missing in that first year. So it can kind of begin with a few things, you know, like landscape or setting, definitely some kind of atmosphere or feeling. But there have been there's a story in Creature. God, it's terrible to forget the title of one's own story. I think furniture, table, chair, shelves.
Yeah.
Where I very much had the sort of tropical farm of Lee Spector's The Apple in the Dark with me, and also just the feeling of spaciousness and Duras' The Ravishing of Lowell Stein. And so, like with that story, I remember I sort of started with like tropical farm and like rejection, like the emptiness of rejection, and wanting to sort of perform the rejection.
But I always think of you, I think about how much you love Ravishing of Lowell Stein and how much you dislike The Lover. And I'm always think that's so funny.
Yeah.
The Lover's too excessive, right? It's too weepy.
Yeah. There are times when I do not like Duras, and there are times, you know, like I reread The Ravishing of Lowell Stein because I wrote an essay on it last summer, and so I reread it after like 10 years, and I still
the friendship in it.
Yeah, but I don't know. Before we go, Kate, like, what about you? What do you start with, or like, do you have these phases, or like, is it different with each project?
Well, it's different now with like a kid, and I'm now going to have 2 kids. So I basically am not writing at all. Sounds so bad, but I'm not. I mean, but I am. Like, I'm kind of. But it's good for me in a way because I think I was always at my essence an incredibly slow writer. So now that I don't have much time to write, it's good because I allow myself to like stew on things for a long time and allow that to sort of, I mean, most of my writing takes place in the notebook for a while, even if I don't use any of it. And that's like that is that open space for me, is the space of the notebook. But like the Gabert book, I could just sit down and write it, and I don't know why I won't do it. I just kind of feel like sometimes I'm not ready to write something. I might not have the time or space to, but I'm trying to solve something with the form or the tone. And once I solve that, then I can write it. But like Driss, I wanted to feel very easy, but it was very tortured writing it. I wrote it for many, many years and rewrote it for a long time. And sometimes I think the having a practice is so private to me, and it's so much like that private feeling we're discussing, that I actually desire to keep things for a long time. So I don't want to release it. It's more of a personal, like private thing. I guess that sounds like masturbation or something.
No, that's a good answer. I like it.
Well, I think we have like a couple minutes, right? So no, we're done.
Yeah. Let's see. We could take one more, or we could
But just
turn
the
it over to
Lispector reminds me of how I first met you, which is now like 15 years ago, but we didn't meet each other. And just like in the painting, I remember only seeing the back of your head, that we were in the adjunct office at Columbia College. And you were teaching this class on women's literature, which was like one of the assigned diversity classes, right? And then I was just offered the class, and Suzanne Scanlon also taught there, and you had a Lispector quote on your syllabus.
Yeah. And in that class, I taught The Daydreams of a Drunk Woman, the short story by Lee Spector, which you write about, right? In Drift. I don't think you name it, but I thought, which is such a good story. But I like that connection a lot. Yeah.
Okay, well, it was so nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
And thank you everyone for attending.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm back here. Thank you both. That was so beautiful. And I think there's such an immediacy with what you both do and your friends. And so that was really lovely that you shared that with us. Thank you everyone that attended, and all your comments and all your wonderful questions. We're going to do this hopefully monthly, so please tune back in for that. And I'm just going to direct you guys back to the bookshop button for all the obvious reasons you want these novels in your life. So click that, and thank you both again.
Thanks, Libby.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Libby.
Right.
Yeah,
thank you, dear guests. Absolutely.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.